We will begin in just a moment. Hello and welcome, everyone. Welcome to the New Year Wellness Series, packed with meaningful guidance on spiritual, relational, emotional, nutritional, physical, and mental wellness. I'm Sarah Green, the wellness consultant at the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health at FAU Medicine. Integrative health is a holistic, patient-focused approach to healthcare and wellness. At the Marcus Institute, our physicians treat the whole person by examining everything that makes up a patient's health, including factors that can lead to disease, affect nutrition, exercise, and stress. Ultimately, patients and physicians are partners in healing and wellness. The Marcus Institute is pleased to co-sponsor the series with our friends at the Robin Rubin Center for Happiness and Life Enhancement. The center is housed in the Sandler School of Social Work within the College of Social Work and Criminal Justice at FAU. They offer weekly wellness programming free of charge and conveniently online. Students, faculty, staff, friends, family, all are welcome and encouraged to attend all Robin Rubin Center events, which include meditations on Tuesdays and Fridays, as well as special events like this one. We are posting links in the chat now and invite you to learn more about the Marcus Institute and Robin Rubin Center and make plans to join us again in the near future. So I am so excited to welcome today's wellness expert, Dr. Brooke Starkoff. Dr. Brooke Starkoff is a professor of exercise science in the Department of Kinesiology at Valparaiso University. Their courses include kinesiology, exercise science, nutrition, sports nutrition, and fitness assessment and exercise prescription. Their research focuses on the impact of sedentary behavior and nutrition on the cardiovascular health of adolescents with obesity. Additionally, Dr. Starkoff is a registered dietitian nutritionist and is particularly interested in examining the impact of plant-based diets on individuals living in low-income neighborhoods. Dr. Starkoff is originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and currently lives in Northwest Indiana with their wife and son. So before I hand it over to Dr. Starkoff, I just want to share that while this entire wellness series has been an honor and a privilege and lots of excitement for me to be a part of in co-hosting, Dr. Starkoff is actually a third cousin of mine and our first time collaborating professionally. So I am just incredibly honored to have Brooke Starkoff here with us today. And with no further ado, I will hand it over. Thank you so much for your time and expertise.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here, and I welcome you all. I'm so glad to have you here as we talk about plant-based lifestyle and what that can mean for improving your health, whether it's mind, body, or soul. And so, again, very thankful to have you here. The assumption is that some of you might be here to learn more about plant-based diet. Maybe some of you have already started to embrace that. Maybe you're here because you're family or friend and I bribed you to come here, but either way, very happy to have you. And as we go through, if you have questions, if you want to, you can put them in the chat box and we'll try to get to most of those at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kind of get into the power of plants here and how they can fuel us and improve our health. And so really, I'll kind of start by looking at our progression of nutritional recommendations in the country over the last 30 or so years, talk a little bit about what a plant-based lifestyle includes, the benefits of a plant-based lifestyle in healing the body, improving the mind, and overall improvements for the soul and feeling better. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about transitioning to a plant-based diet or helping you in that journey. And in doing so, talk about some of the concerns of doing that, some tips, some resources, and certainly I'll try to get to as many questions as I can today. So I first want to just kind of give you a really brief background on the history of nutrition guidelines here in the United States. Some of you might remember this original food guide pyramid from the early 90s. It was created to give us a sense of how we should be eating. And maybe you remember seeing this and remember thinking, I don't understand this. It seemed a little clunky, a little complicated, and to be completely honest, wasn't really based on solid research, right? We had these carbs and bread products and grains down at the bottom. there was no deciphering between whole grains and refined grains. And then as we move to the top, seeing more of the meat, the eggs, the poultry, and things of that nature. And over time, so in the early 2000s, the USDA released their My Plate image to kind of make it a little bit easier to follow. And so the thought was you just divide your plate in quarters and you have fruits, veggies, grains, and protein, and a glass of milk. And that was really the recommendation. Again, not based on a lot of strong science. And there's also some thought that if the USDA is subsidizing farmers and paying farmers to produce certain products, how are they also the ones responsible for telling us what we should be eating? And so with a little bit more research, the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health released their version of what they call the healthy eating plate. And this was in about 2011, this came out. And you can see it's very similar in nature. You've got a lot of vegetables on your plate, fruits, grains, and protein. But the big difference here, you'll notice a couple of things. One is it says whole grains, right? So they're very specifically letting you know that it's the whole grains that are the healthy grains that we should be consuming. And it says healthy protein, and they say very specifically, choose fish or poultry, beans and nuts, and a reminder to limit red meat and cheese and cold cuts and things like that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the two really significant changes here that you'll see is that instead of the dairy, they've replaced it with a glass of water. As we start diving into the research that has been conducted for the last 60 plus years, we can see that dairy isn't really what we need, right? Calcium is something that we need, and we can get calcium from lots of sources that aren't dairy. And with research, we found that really dairy has a lot of negative health consequences. So they've replaced that with water. The other addition you'll see here is the healthy oils up in the left-hand corner. And you may have heard of the Mediterranean diet. There was a big focus on those who eat diets that are specific to Mediterranean countries tend to have better health outcomes. And those diets are higher in healthy oils and plant-based oils, unsaturated oils, versus butter and lard and animal fat products. However, what I'm going to talk about in a little bit is that part of the plant-based movement, depending on how far you are in that spectrum, there's been a lot of research about the impact of oil in our body and the fact that we really don't even need to be consuming oil at all. So yes, it's healthier to consume oil versus fat, animal fat products. But if you went a little bit further and didn't consume oil at all, that would elicit even greater health benefits. But here we are, right? Here in the United States, we have significant issues with health and disease, and one of them being overweight and obesity, right? Currently in the United States, about 74% of our population is overweight or obese. That's a really alarming number. And part of the reason that that's concerning is that we know that with overweight and obesity comes a whole host of diseases, right? One of which being diabetes. 90% or so, between 85 and 90% of individuals who have diabetes are also overweight and obese. And we know that that can then contribute to heart disease. And so there's a whole host of diseases that come from that. Another major disease in the United States, cardiovascular disease. This is the #1 killer in the United States, or maybe prior to COVID it was, but is a major concern here in our country as well as many others. I talked a little bit about the impact of diabetes on our healthcare system, particularly type 2 diabetes, although type 1 I will talk about a little bit. We used to call type 2 diabetes adult onset diabetes, but now we're seeing many, many children, 6, 7 years old, who are acquiring this disease. And so that should be a pretty huge wake-up call for us as well. Specific cancers, colorectal cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer are some of the biggest health issues we deal with in the United States as well. And then musculoskeletal health, particularly osteoporosis and loss of strength. And over time, we've kind of termed these diseases of affluence. It used to be that if you had money, you were able to afford food and you had better health outcomes. But now the issue is that we've become kind of overfed and undernourished. And so the people who have more oftentimes are dealing with these diseases as well. So let me just kind of clarify some terms before we move on. So, omnivore, this is the diet that most people in the United States follow. It's an animal-based diet. Lean, whether it's lean meats, red meats, it's eating any sort of animal product. And then as we shift down that spectrum from an animal-based diet to a plant-based diet, the next step over would be a pesco-vegetarian. So someone who doesn't eat meat necessarily, but does eat fish. Or there's lacto-ovo vegetarians, which are they don't eat animal products except for milk and eggs. And then vegan is devoid of any animal products. And that oftentimes includes honey for folks as well, because that's a byproduct from bees. But I want to make a distinction because there are plenty of vegan foods out there that aren't healthy, right? And so instead of me coming out and telling you to consume a vegan diet, which could include French fries and non-dairy ice cream and Oreos and potato chips, I'm certainly not going to tell you that that's a healthy way to live. And so the distinction is that a plant-based diet is really what it says it is, a whole food plant-based diet. We're choosing foods in their whole components. They are natural, real foods that come out of the ground, and we consume them in their entirety. And so I just want to make sure that that distinction is made clear early on. So what does that include? If we look at our stoplight of foods here, whole food plant-based diet is going to include any whole grains, leafy greens, fruits and veggies, legumes, root vegetables, spices, omega-3 seeds like your chia and your flaxseed, and then water or decaf teas and coffees. As we move into the limiting section, some of these foods, and some of you might be a little perplexed by this, but I'll explain in a moment. We should be limiting potentially nuts, seeds, dried fruit, avocado, sweeteners, caffeine, and alcohol. Now, I want to talk about the nuts and seeds and avocado and all that, because I did say earlier that if a whole food diet is about eating foods in their entirety, the original whole entire item. The reason that nuts and seeds and dried fruits and avocados are in the limit list is because these foods are typically much higher in fat and higher in calories. And part of the whole food plant-based movement is promoting health by reducing the amount of fat consumed. And so again, this is part of the spectrum. Some folks really will kind of limit these, particularly if you're dealing with heart disease and or obesity, you want to limit these. But just so you're clear as to why there's a limitation on there. And then in the red zone, things to avoid: meat, dairy, and eggs, pop, juice, sports drinks. And then under plant fragments, you'll see oils. And that goes back to what I said earlier, that yes, having a plant-based oil, an unsaturated plant-based oil, so I'm not talking about coconut oil here, is better than having butter or lard, but certainly you can achieve better health benefits from avoiding oil altogether. So I want to be clear that, I'm sure a lot of people here hearing a lot about diets, right? We're talking about Mediterranean diet. There's, keto diet, paleo, all these diets that exist. But what I'm talking about is really a lifestyle. And there's been research for over 100 years on folks who follow plant-based diets. And so one of the groups of research that's been done is what's called the blue zones. And these are areas across the world where people live the longest with the healthiest outcome, right? So there's parts of Greece, there's parts of Spain, Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California, and Okinawa, Japan. And what they've noticed from these regions where people live the longest and the healthiest is that they sort of have these 9 components in common. They move regularly, they have purpose, they are able to downshift, and they have a sense of belonging, they have a group that they belong to. But what I really want to focus on is this plant slant, right? That the majority, that the individuals who live in these communities follow a heavy plant-based diet. Again, these are people who live the longest. One of these groups are Okinawan women, right? So Okinawa, Japan has the greatest percentage of individuals, they're called centenarians, who live to the age of 100 and have a healthy life, quality of life. And if we look at what they're eating or what they've eaten for their life, we can see that a large portion of that, right, 67% of that is sweet potatoes. You see rice and veggies and legumes on there. But you're also going to see that 2% of their diet does come from fish, meat, and poultry. And so you could say, well, wait, they're not plant-based. This goes against everything. But 2% of their diet comes from fish, meat, and poultry. That means that they're having small amounts occasionally, not every day. It's not the center of every meal. And so I think a big part of this is we need to kind of start shifting the way we approach our meals. Another significant study on plant-based diets comes out of the China study. This was conducted in the early 80s. And this book, by the way, is one of my first recommendations as a resource for folks who are interested in seeing the research behind it and looking into the transition into a plant-based lifestyle. But in this study, they found more than 8,000 associations between diet and disease. And specifically, they looked at all these different regions in China, and they found that those regions that had higher meat and dairy consumptions also had the greatest risk of poor health outcomes. And so the overall conclusion with this massive nationwide study was that a lower percentage of specifically animal protein, right? I'm not saying fat or saturated fat, I'm saying animal protein, lower percentage of that led to greater health benefits. So those who want more information, I highly, highly recommend this book. It sits on my nightstand, and I typically review it daily. There's just such great information in there. So let's get to the heart of this, right? What can this do for you? So I had mentioned Seventh-day Adventists. There's lots of research. This population typically is vegetarian, not everyone, but large percentages of Seventh-day Adventists are vegetarian. And if we look at this study, so over 60,000 participants, if we look at the body mass index, which is looking at their height and their weight, we can see that those who had a lower BMI, they had a lower weight for their height, are those who followed a vegan diet. And if we look at the type 2 diabetes prevalence, the image on the right side, look at that difference in the prevalence of diabetes between those who followed a non-vegetarian diet and a vegan diet, right? 7.6% of those who followed a non-vegetarian diet acquired type 2 diabetes versus a little less than 3% on a vegan diet. So really staggering results. Let's look at cholesterol, okay? Meat eaters versus vegans. You can see, there's a 34-point difference there in total cholesterol levels, which are highly indicative of heart disease. I want to point out specifically the issue with red meat and processed meat, right? So in 2015, the World Health Organization identified processed meat as a group 1 carcinogen, meaning there was strong enough evidence that there was a link between processed meat and cancer, right? But you're not seeing stickers on your processed meat that tell you that this food causes cancer, right? And so there was a little bit of press about it, but it very quickly went away and very quickly disappeared. And then red meat was considered a type 2A carcinogen, which meant it likely causes cancer. And so these are the things I want you to think about as you're consuming food. Do you want to be consuming things that likely cause cancer, right? And just to give you some context, DDT, which is a pesticide, a very toxic pesticide, is also considered a group 2A carcinogen. So things to consider as you're considering where you are in that spectrum. And the nutrition is so impactful, plant-based diet is so impactful that it can not only prevent disease, but it can reverse disease, right? Specifically heart disease. Caldwell Esselstyn, who is a physician at the Cleveland Clinic, has done decades of research on this and really found a significant ability to reverse heart disease on a plant-based diet. Obesity, we can prevent it and we can reverse it. Diabetes, including type 1. Now, I know there's a big difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes, but you could potentially prevent type 1 diabetes on a plant-based lifestyle. You can certainly prevent type 2 diabetes and reverse it. And the same, I have GDM there, which is gestational diabetes. You can prevent that on a plant-based diet as well. Many common cancers, autoimmune diseases, and bone, kidney, eye, brain disease, all of those can be avoided and can be reversed on a plant-based diet. It's even so significant that American Cancer Society very lightly touches on it. I know this is hard to see, but really promoting colorful vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and then it says avoid or limit red meats. And it kind of explains what meats to avoid. National Kidney Foundation very recently has embraced plant-based diet for kidney health. And the American Diabetes Association is a little bit slower to make the leap, but they do promote fruits and veggies, and they very recently added plant-based sources of protein to their recommendations. So how about for the brain? Well, we know that heart-healthy diets protect the brain, particularly by limiting added sugar and saturated fats. Saturated fats are mostly in animal products, coconut oil kind of being one of the few exceptions. Eating significant amounts of fruits and veggies and whole grains, and that a whole food plant-based diet is really what's optimal for the brain. So preventing Alzheimer's and dementia. And then lastly, for the soul, right? And this is a little bit harder to define and describe. Everyone sort of finds their peace in different realms. But certainly if you're an animal lover and you think about maybe the stress that animals go to prior to being slaughtered, maybe you'll feel a little better not putting them through that process, right? We know that there's a huge impact on the environment. It takes about 1,800 gallons of water for 1 pound of beef versus 150 gallons of water for 1 pound of potatoes. So much less demand on the environment to give you what you need, right? So we're doing it for the environment, doing it for your health, doing it for the animals. It's easy to see how this could be soul fulfilling for many folks. All right, so we know the research. The question now for you is it worth it to make this jump? And I think that's a really interesting perspective, right? If we see ourselves as sort of in the middle, okay, plant-based lifestyle all the way to one side, and then I have cabbage on the left side, that's coronary artery bypass graft. So if we think about it, many Americans every year will have their chest sliced open. They'll have a vessel taken from their leg and reattached to their heart, right? And so if you say that a plant-based lifestyle is extreme, maybe you want to compare it to what the other option could be. And so any shift towards that plant-based lifestyle is seemingly a shift away from the more extreme health complications that you're going to have. My biggest pieces of advice, right? The first piece of advice is to start with one meal. Pick one meal that you want to be plant-based. Maybe it's breakfast once a week. Maybe it's lunch once a week. You pick that one meal and then you find something you want to replace it with. And, you know, in the age of the internet, there's no shortage of resources, of recipes available. And so a quick Google of plant-based breakfast will bring up hundreds of, if not thousands of recipes, right? And I've given some websites here that will help you plan some of those recipes, many of them, especially those ones at the bottom. So Physician Committee for Responsible Medicine, that PCRM.org, they have Kickstart programs. So they help you, get you the tools that you need and try it for 21 days, or sometimes they're even 2 weeks long just to get you in the habit. So some great resources on how to get started there. The other way to look at it is when we tell people, well, you have to just stop eating meat. That could be a really big leap for some folks. And so my perspective is, rather than saying stop eating meat, start crowding out your meal with vegetables. So if you're having, a stir fry, instead of having it filled with lots of, shrimp or chicken or pork or whatever you put in there, maybe it's filled with your broccoli and your carrots and your cabbage and edamame, and then potentially you put a little bit of meat in there, and you kind of crowd out the meat with more vegetables. I've listed a couple cookbooks that will also help transition to a plant-based lifestyle. Forks Over Knives is one of the big groups that promotes plant-based lifestyle. How Not to Die cookbook. So there's Michael Greger is a physician, and he's a big part of the plant-based movement. And he's got several books: How Not to Die, How Not to Diet, How Not to Diet in a Pandemic. And so he's got lots of resources to help make that transition. And then Bad Manners used to go by the name Thug Kitchen. They changed their name in light of social justice issues. And really great vegan recipes. But one note, lots of really intense bad language in there. So if you have small children at home, maybe not the appropriate cookbook for you. The other tool I want to point you to, and this has probably been one of the best tools, it helped me in my transition to a plant-based lifestyle. This is Michael Greger's Daily Dozen Checklist. This is an app you can download on your phone, and it tells you specifically what you should be eating. So you could see at the top, 3 servings of beans a day, 3 servings of fruit, 2 servings of greens, 1 serving of flaxseed, right? And if you pull up the app on your phone, you can check it off as you go along through the day, but it also helps you maybe create your meals. If you get to dinner and you think, I still need a green and a cruciferous and some seeds, that might help you put together a great meal. And so this is really easy to follow. He mentioned specifically what counts as a serving. There are videos on there. Just a great free app that's a huge resource in this. Just really quickly want to touch on some concerns. I would imagine these might come up in the questions. The biggest question I get is, where do you get your protein from? Well, where do elephants, who are also plant eaters, get their protein from? They're pretty massive muscular animals. They don't seem to be lacking in protein. As a reminder, we don't see a lot of people in the hospitals who have protein deficiency unless they have calorie deficiency. So just a list for you to look at of all plant-based foods, or a few plant-based foods, and the amount of protein they offer per serving, right? And if you look at spinach, 1 cup of spinach is going to provide 5 grams of protein. And 1 cup of spinach, when you put that into a pan and you heat that up, disappears into like 1 leaf. But the amount of protein in spinach, so 49% of that is made up of protein. There are protein in plants. It's where the animals get it from. And then we eat the animals to get the protein. So just go directly to the source, right? The other issue is anemia. Where am I going to get my iron from? Again, beans, peas, spinach, lentils, quinoa, all of those foods are great sources of iron and will help you prevent things like anemia. And then the last question I get, particularly with my students in sport nutrition, is, well, I'm an athlete. I need protein. Not as much as you think. And so I wanted to just highlight a couple of athletes who are doing just fine on a plant-based diet, whether it's significant or they're substantial or completely on a plant-based diet, or they're kind of just moving on that spectrum toward a plant-based diet. So Kyrie Irving, NBA player, Venus Williams and Serena Williams both tend to follow vegan diets. And not only is it great for performance, but has also helped with some health issues that Venus deals with. Lewis Hamilton, who's an F1 driver, is vegan. Rich Roll, who's an endurance athlete. Alex Morgan, amazing soccer player. And Patrick Baboumian, who's a strong man, he's a very large gentleman, is able to maintain substantial muscle mass on a plant-based diet. It's not hard to do. Just wanted to provide you with some resources in case you want to go on, read some more books about it. These books these are all research focused books, so they have a lot of the research there. And then some documentaries. And I always say with documentaries, they're one-sided. Keep that in mind. Of course, they're going to be opinionated. But again, if 10% of these films are accurate, I'm embracing a plant-based lifestyle. So, these will all be available to you. And I encourage you to look through them to potentially get a little bit more information. So at this point, I know there's a survey I've embedded here that you all need to complete. And I will take questions when I'm able.
So thank you so much, Dr. Starkoff. Can everyone see that survey link? Because it just disappeared from my screen.
No, let me share my screen again.
Perfect.
I think that.
Your feedback is so important to us. Please take a 1-minute complete survey. And if you don't see it on your screen, you can see it in the chat box. It's a SurveyMonkey link. So while everyone is hopefully taking just a moment to fill out that survey, I have to let you know that this was by far so educational and engaging, and I'm putting you on the spot right now, but there are so many questions in the chat box that I'm going to ask you right now if we can do another wellness workshop offline another time to dive even deeper into this, because we only have a few minutes to explore all these questions. So I hope we can coordinate schedules to do that. I've been taking notes from the chat box, and I'm going to kind of just try to highlight the questions that are applicable to the greatest audience. And then people that have individual questions or specific food questions, you can reach Dr. Starkoff at her contact information that will be in the chat box at the end. So one of the questions that stood out was, what is your opinion of faux meat?
It's a great question. So first of all, I have lots of opinions, but I will give you the scientific, the research on that, right? It's newer into the industry. So I assume by faux meat, we're talking about like maybe Impossible burgers and the things that look and smell and taste like real meat. It's not part of the whole food plant-based movement. Now, if you're going to shift away from a meat lifestyle to a plant-based lifestyle, it's potentially a better option for the environment, maybe for your health, but we don't know enough about it yet. And foods that are made in a lab, I tend to be a little bit more hesitant about that because it's not a naturally man-made product. And what are we, if we're putting things into our system that our body doesn't recognize, the first response of the body is to fight it, attack it, and that creates a sense of inflammation, which leads to disease. So if it's being used as a transition tool for a little bit, potentially a little bit better, but I recommend kind of staying away from that. And same with like the Morning Star and the Boca things. If it's a transitional tool, great. But moving into a whole food plant-based diet is where you're going to see the most benefit.
Great feedback. So moving on to, you brought up the word inflammation. And so there was a question about autoimmune disease and a whole food plant-based diet, possibly reversing autoimmune disease. Can you comment on some of the latest research there?
Sure. And I'll specifically look at type 1 diabetes, right? So type 1 diabetes is a dysfunction of the pancreas where, you're not able to produce insulin at all. And that's because the cells have attacked each other themselves for a myriad of reasons. But some of the research is really showing that potentially it's an introduction of cow's milk early on. That is something that our bodies are not used to having to digest and having to break down. It's not a normal product for our bodies to break down. And so that creates this sort of autoimmune, the body attacking its own cells. And so there's a lot of research that getting rid of these acidic products that our bodies aren't used to, like meat and dairy, or that our bodies don't know how to process, by eliminating those, that would potentially help reduce or reverse or prevent autoimmune diseases.
Perfect. And another question that came up is, can you just give a definition of what processed meat was? The person that asked the question said, is deli meat processed meat? Absolutely, but maybe you can expand on what else is considered processed.
Sure. Hot dogs, chicken nuggets, packaged, so all deli meats, pepperoni, anything that you see on a charcuterie board is typically processed. So those, sausages, those are your big sources of processed meat. So those are the ones that you really want to stay away from.
Okay, great. And how about, what is your stance on healthy sugars like the monk fruit, the stevia, and such?
Sure. We, again, kind of newer items that have been brought into the food place. And so we don't know a ton about what the response is to that yet. But typically, anything that's processed, we want to avoid. Now, if it's minimal, then again, moving down that spectrum is better. But if, the other big thing is that once you start taking processed foods, which have a lot of salt and a lot of added sugar in them, out of your diet, the taste buds on your tongue will start to appreciate foods as they are, right? So we heavily salt everything. We've gotten to the point where we need salt in all of our food for it to taste good. But if you start to reduce those items from your diet, your taste buds will start to appreciate the actual flavor of foods. They sort of have hijacked how we respond to flavor. And so your best bet is to get any processed food out of the diet and really just focus on whole foods.
Great. Someone else commented that they recently purchased chia seeds and flax seeds and such, and were wondering how to use them. Another participant shared that they put it in salads and smoothies. I personally put it on eggs, in yogurt. I bake with them all the time. I have young kids and they still sometimes want, we call it like a healthier version of cereal, like some, low sugar granola. And I make them put chia seeds or basil seeds in there for all those health benefits. Dr. Starkoff, do you have other recommendations?
Yeah, I think the benefits with chia and flax seeds, right? 1 tablespoon will give you the omega-3s that you need for the day. We've heard a lot that you need to have fish and you have fish oil, but you need omega-3, not fish oil. And so 1 tablespoon a day will get you what you need. You could even put it in marinara sauce. They don't have a ton of flavor to them. They'll have a little bit of a nuttier taste to it, but you can add it to marinara. You can, I put mine in oatmeal, and I think the idea of putting it in yogurt is a great idea. Wherever you can pop it in there, they have such a low flavor profile that it's often hidden, and so can provide a lot of nutritional value.
Wonderful. Thank you. We have another question here about how much protein is needed for a day. And I know there's a lot of factors that go into that, like weight and lifestyle. Can you give kind of a general answer? And then if that person wants to reach out to you directly, they can do so.
Sure. So most adults need about 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. So, take your body weight, divide it by 2.2. That tells you how many kilograms, and then multiply that by 0.8. So it's not as much as you think. In fact, it's one of the macronutrients we don't need as much as is currently prescribed. And so somewhere between 46 and 56 grams a day would be for an average person. Now, if there's health complications, that's a little bit different. If you're an athlete, particularly an endurance athlete, you'll need a little bit more, maybe 1 to 1.2. If you are a strength athlete and you're looking to build some mass, maybe closer to 1.7 or 1.8. But really, above 2 is unnecessary. Our bodies really even have a difficult time processing that much protein. And so really there's very little need, unless you're having major health issues, very little need to consume more protein than, that 1.7, 1.8 if you're on the strength side of it.
Great info. Another question that came through, how can you stir fry without using any oil?
Oh, I love that question. There's lots of things that you can use. First of all, I know woks are typically not, they don't have Teflon on them, right? So things are going to stick to it. So a couple of options, using like a low sodium broth, even using water. I like to use sometimes a little bit of like a rice vinegar. And it just means sometimes you got to just, make sure you're stirring it a little bit more, but there's lots of other liquid alternatives than using oil. And I see someone, kind of had a question about turmeric, and this is kind of a good place to put that in. Turmeric is one of those spices, really healthy, has great benefits. And so, adding that to something like a stir fry, and you only need a little bit, right? You don't have to overuse that, but stir fries are typically my go-to meal, my favorite meals, because you can do so much with them, pack the veggies in. But again, just getting some water as liquid to saute is all you need.
Thank you. While we're on the subject of turmeric, my understanding is that in order to activate the beneficial part of turmeric, the curcumin, I always fumble with that, that you need to add black pepper. Can you comment on that?
I have not heard that before. I will have to look into that. I know that just turmeric on its own, I think can provide those benefits. There's, you can put it in a tea. You can make curries, which is kind of why some cultures, have better cardiovascular health, because they're relying on turmeric more in their meals. But I haven't heard about the black pepper, so I will definitely look into that.
Perfect. I think we have time for about 2 more questions. Someone asked, do you consider miso as processed?
No, and actually miso, because it's more fermented, right? So if you look at the How Not to Die cookbooks, miso is a huge part of many of those recipes. And so that fermentation process is not really the same as processed food. So not at all. I encourage using miso in soups and stews and things like that.
Great. So there are more questions than we will be able to get to, but I'm going to finish with one. Oh, someone just commented, Michael Gregor explains that papain and black pepper is important to enhance turmeric. Yes. Okay. So we'll follow up with that. So, I know you do a lot of research, with the overweight, obese, demographic. And so I'm wondering if you can comment, someone asked, what is the definition of that? And I know there's some variables there, but if you could kind of give a broad answer, that would be great.
Absolutely. So, going back to when we were looking at BMI, so the definition of overweight is a BMI that's between 25 and 29.9. And I could tell you how to do it, but honestly, if you just Google BMI calculator, you could just put in your height and weight and it'll calculate it for you. So, between 25 and 29.9 is considered overweight, and then anything over 30 is obese. And the one population that, where this is a little tricky for would be athletes, right? So LeBron James is technically overweight. Not really though, right? So there's There's other ways to measure, but for the general population, BMI is a great tool. So I encourage you all to just take a look at where your BMI is. Obviously, as we get a little bit older, we start to lose some muscle mass. And so that might also not be the best representation, but it's still a pretty good picture. So I encourage you all to take a look at that, as well as taking a look at blood profiles, right? So understanding what your cholesterol is, understanding what your blood pressure is, and that there are other means to reduce those than medicine, right? The things that are kind of just targeting that one symptom, where we know that diet and exercise can really target the entire system. And I think that's a great focus, is looking more at how can I fix the whole body rather than just one symptom.
Great. Thank you so much. So we are just about out of time, everyone. We want to share 2 quick notes before we go. Thank you all for being here, particularly Dr. Starkoff. I know the chat box holds the contact information where they can find out more about you and your work. Everyone else that's here with us today, mark your calendars for our next and final installment in the series next Wednesday, same time, same place, where we will be talking about mental wellness and the science of mindfulness. We recommend creating a reminder on your calendar along with the access link. That way you preserve the time and have a built-in reminder. You can find our access link in your email confirmation that you received when you registered for today's event. Like I said, same time, same place, and same link. A big thank you again to the Robin Rubin Center for Happiness and Life Enhancement and the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health at FAU Medicine for co-sponsoring this fantastic series. Hope to see you all next Wednesday when we wrap up our series. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a healthy and happy Wednesday. Bye, everyone.